I think where we've gone wrong when it comes to talking about addiction, I think we put so much energy in the end instead of understanding the beginning. You know, when your 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade boy comes home, daughter comes home, and she just went through her first experience with drugs or alcohol, I think parents are so concerned about where they got it, who they were with, how much did they do. They don't understand why.
Do you think people know right away if substances are an issue for them, or do you think there are certain people where it creeps up on them?
Alcohol is probably the scariest of, when it creeps up on you.
What's the first best step for somebody who goes, you know what, this is going somewhere I need to redirect?
I ask people all the time, why wait? Why wait for it? Take that step. Why wait? People often say to me, like, if you had a chance and you could go back to that dorm room that night at 18 years old, or the first time you did heroin, what would you do? And it's always been, I would.
Greatness isn't built overnight. It takes years of hard work, practice, and dedication. But what happens when that hard work comes at the expense of your mental health? What happens when you reach the pinnacle of success only for unresolved childhood trauma to come roaring back? Well, that's what we're talking about today with Chris Herren. His NBA career is a modern day tragedy. He was an exceptional basketball player who practiced tirelessly to overcome a really difficult childhood. So when he was drafted in the second round of the 1999 draft, most people saw him as a true American story. But for Chris, he felt like a time bomb ready to explode. Internally, Chris was battling with addiction and really losing the war. In 2004, he was arrested for heroin possession, and in 2008, he overdosed and crashed his car. Paramedics would later tell him that he was legally dead for 30 seconds. To many, Chris's fall from grace seemed sudden, but in reality, the warning signs were always there. Just as there's no such thing as an overnight success, there are always clues before the fall. However, today, Chris has turned his life around and is dedicated to helping others avoid the mistakes he made. He works with young people facing the same challenges he once did, shifting the measure of success from the scoreboard to the lives he's impacting. So whether you or someone you know struggles with addiction, or you're just looking for ways to build better habits, Chris has invaluable insights to share. Welcome to the Gabby Reece Show. Let's go. Chris Herren, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I wish you were here in person. I always prefer talking to people in person, especially people like you, but I am so excited to have you on. I have obviously followed your whole story, and it's my favorite kind of story in the way that you being successful is going to be great for you and your family, but actually all that you went through weirdly is going to benefit so many other people.
Yeah, no, I thank you. Right. The last 16 years have been more than I could have ever imagined. Right. I never, part of me getting sober 16 years ago, I really didn't think, honestly, sadly, that it would be worth it. I thought I would have fallen so far that there was no place left to go. And gosh, it's changed.
So maybe we can just back up for people. We can refresh their memory. You're from Boston, a pretty rugged area of Boston. You were certainly, if not the top recruit coming out of high school, definitely one of the top recruits. And you end up going, to play in college and even to play in the pros. But the journey along the way, people will use a term like a fall from grace, but when I see a story like yours, I go, okay, that's a sensitive person, because, maybe you can just share sort of maybe even starting in middle school, kind of some of the changes that you went through.
Sure. And oftentimes when I just walked out of an auditorium with 1,000 middle school kids in Cleveland, Ohio. And, as I said to them, I think I think where we've gone wrong when it comes to talking about addiction, I think we put so much energy in the end instead of understanding the beginning, right? And my problem started way before. Uh, my dad, alcoholism is in generations in my family. I grew up in a house that was always kind of off kilter because of it. Um, very, very low and high expectations on what was going to come home at night. So I was a scared kid, right? I just never knew what the night was going to be like. Ultimately, that led to my mom finally getting the strength to divorce my dad. And I was just then going into my freshman year at Boston College. Um, so I wasn't settled at all. I didn't have a background of talking about this and working through trauma. I just kind of white knuckled it and focused on basketball. But there was always a part of me, even when I was young, that I knew it wasn't going to last. You talk about the fall from grace. I anticipated that fall, sadly, for years. I knew who I was. I knew how I felt. And I knew that it wasn't sustainable. And ultimately, um, exactly that happened.
So when you were younger, it was, probably more alcohol, and then when you get to college, it becomes, cocaine, and then
Mhm.
eventually opioids, and so I'm just curious, when you think about, let's say you were in eighth grade, because you have three kids,
Yes.
and when I started thinking about the story, I thought, okay, if you were dealing with, and you said it a little bit, if you're talking to a middle school person
Mhm.
who can't relate,
Yeah.
to somebody who's gone through this, path, what are the ways that we could talk to somebody at that age to even begin to, if there is things to unpeel,
Mm.
so maybe they can avoid using that to medicate or feel good? Because
Mm.
I think what people don't realize oftentimes is, at least in my experience, is it feels like everybody, like I'm very analytical. And
Mhm.
so I joke that I say I'm way too linear and too analytical to be an addict.
Mm.
It's the people who feel everything, they're sensitive, they're heart based.
And pain.
Uh, I think that they're more vulnerable. So what is it? And then talk about boys, right?
Mm.
You're going to talk about young boys, and how are you going to talk to them about their feelings when everything around them says, hey, be
Toughen up.
strong, be
Mm.
stoic. What do you say to young people at that age to even get them to start to dance with, well, how is everything, and are there ways for me to deal with it?
I think a lot of parents, dance around it. I think, when your eighth grade, ninth grade, 10th grade boy comes home, daughter comes home, and she just went through her first experience with drugs or alcohol. I think oftentimes parents are so concerned about where they got it, who they were with, how much did they do. They don't understand why, and I just think the why is so important. And I think so many parents miss the opportunity to understand that child's why. I mean, the truth is, listen, it's embarrassing. I've been doing this for 15 years speaking, and I have yet to walk into a school where like wellness is a core class. Kids don't have a space for it, right? I speak at schools that, have 3,000 high school kids, students, and they have 6 guidance counselors. There's 800 students on one person's caseload.
Yeah.
Um, and to be honest with you, God bless them, those guidance counselors are stretched so thin, right? Their job title falls into so much more than it used to. Um, so I think it's creating space, it's creating opportunity for kids to openly discuss how they're feeling. And again, I can just go off what happened an hour ago. I just spoke to a bunch of seventh and eighth graders, and again, my presentation to them is not about shooting heroin. It's not about overdosing. It's not about losing my Celtics career. It's all about how I felt as a child and why I did what I did as a child. But I had three brave kids stand up and talk about losing their parents and being in foster care and being raised by their aunt. Um, those kids cried their eyes out in front of 800 classmates. But you could tell when they were telling it that it was probably the first time they said that out loud in front of people. So for me, it's just creating that space, that opportunity for kids to feel safe and want to talk about feelings, emotions, etc.
This podcast is brought to you by Bond Charge. I have been loving my red light face mask when my daughters haven't stolen it from me because, first of all, super easy to use. 10, 20 minutes a day. It's cordless. It's lightweight. If you've been curious about red light therapy, it's like having a little mini spa session at your house. Now is the time because red light therapy, there are studies showing that it boosts collagen production, just makes your skin look a little younger, more radiant, kind of keeping some of the signs of aging at bay. Now, I want you to be hydrated and to get to bed and to do all the right things and eat a great diet for your skin. But it's things like this, because people ask me about hacks all the time. These are the things I love. So if you're doing all the right things, it's like that extra little bit that can support and help you. I've given it to my daughters, helps with some blemishes and acne. Maybe you've been curious about the red light therapy. Well, now is the time. All you have to do is go to bondcharge.com. And if you put in the code Gabby, Gabby at checkout, they will give you 15% off your entire order. Now, you hear me talking a lot about other therapies, red light therapy, saunas, things like that. Bond Charge has a ton of very cool products that are more cost effective. If you're trying to get into some of these practices and technologies, all you have to do is go to bondcharge.com. That's BONCHARGE.com. And don't forget to use the code Gabby, Gabby at checkout. Not only will they give you free shipping, but they will also give you a 12-month warranty. So that's bondcharge.com. And remember, if you want that little treat at home, that red light face mask, I don't know, it just does it for me. I think a lot of times too, we're in these environments, like for you, if your dad was the one navigating alcohol and your mom dealing with a marriage and trying to deal with that, it's almost like the one place where we should be able to go and talk about it is often the place that we can't. So do you know, well, first, with parents, I guess what I'm curious at, because I have three daughters and we certainly have gone through our dances over here. When you say that parents, either they ignore it or they kind of look away, is it because it's like, that's too big of a thing for me to open up, or, oh, it's just a kid being a kid and being naturally curious? I guess there's things of that too. So for you as a parent, because again, you have three kids, let's say your oldest, your son, wants to experiment or experiments. How do you navigate that? Because sometimes it's a line, right? Of like, oh, they're going through changes and growing up, or, oh, we might have a problem.
I just don't understand why we've settled, though, that alcohol has to be part of growing up,
Fair.
or drugs have to be part of the teenage years. I think that's kind of where we've gone wrong. We've surrendered to that. And I don't understand why we've surrendered so easily to that. Again, I have a 25-year-old son, a 23-year-old daughter, and a 16-year-old. And to my knowledge, both my older children have never, right? They have never drank alcohol, smoked marijuana. But if they had, right, I'm not about like embarrassing them, punishing them, lecturing them. I just want to understand it. I just want to understand, listen, we come from a family of addiction, right? Genetically, generations, it's followed through. So it's a big risk. It's a big price to pay. And I often say this, to me, as a parent, the scariest thing about addiction is nobody knows who has it. How great would that be if we could identify a child saying, you're the one that's going to suffer when you get older, so you cannot touch it, and the fact that no parent can identify that is it's scary.
It's so interesting because they get into, I grew up in the Caribbean and people drank a ton. So I didn't
Hmm.
drink my adult life because it just looked like chaos to me, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
But, you see kids and they go, well, we're with our friends and it's fun and all of
Hmm.
these things. And it is a really interesting thing when you're trying to navigate against the narrative that society has played, which is it's everywhere, it's socially acceptable, but a lot of times it is such a silent, destructive force that is in so many homes.
Sure. And there's science behind it that supports it, that let your brain grow, age, the frontal lobe, and the chances of you suffering from alcoholism or addiction, they drop drastically. So, I don't know why we don't really hold the line until our children are older. Let them kind of mature and grow up and go through those years, those developmental years. But again, we're fighting against society that it's, kids will be kids. And let's be honest, right? When you say to me, um, you eventually turn to cocaine, which I did at 18 years old, right? I found a drug that allowed me to speak my truth, right? That's what I loved about cocaine. I loved that it allowed me to be vulnerable, to be able to talk all night, communicate how I feel. Like it was a miracle for me. I mean, it was like I was sitting in the room with the best therapist in America, right? So, but today's cocaine is different than yesterday's, right? Like the pills are different. So, and I think that's where, I often say when I speak is that, for years with the beautiful family behind me, I woke up every single day and took a chance at dying. Every single day. When you shoot heroin, when you when you ingest heroin, there's a chance you're going to die from it. Today, when you take pills, when you do cocaine, it's all a possibility now.
Yeah.
The fentanyl has changed that, right? So if you have a 19-year-old kid who's away at college and, I'm just doing some cocaine, everybody had it. It was in the dorm room. Like we all did it. Um, we just took a chance at dying, and don't minimize that because people die every day from cocaine because of fentanyl.
My youngest daughter goes to parties and, she's a senior in high school and they all have Narcan with them
Yeah.
as part of as a regular everyday practice.
Mm-hmm.
So, one thing that really stood out for me when I watched your documentary and I've read your books and seen interviews is people will ask me a lot like, oh, why do you think you were good at something? And I go, oh, fear. For me, it
Mm-hmm.
was fear. I had to pull it. That's how I was going to go to, if I went to college or make money, whatever, that's how I was going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny because to see you play, when you're younger and playing basketball and really that good, but understanding your own thinking, which is one, I have to beat my brother. Then
Mm-hmm.
it becomes, I need to win this game so I don't disappoint every person in my town.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of high vibration, how stressful that is to
Yeah.
be. So how did you navigate those two things of having enough? And I know it was like the big push of energy to make it happen. You've
Mm-hmm.
said yourself like, oh, and I don't agree with it, but it wasn't just that I was really skillful. It was that I created this energy that I was going to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Were there,
like you said, and I identify immediately, right? Like when you say I was good out of fear, I mean that's I believe that's 100% me. Um, Listen, and my parents, my mom, God rest her soul, she died at a young age from cancer. My dad, I love him. He struggles today with alcoholism. Will probably die from it. Um, but I learned at a young age that I can change my house if I perform at a high level. Like when I was in like eighth grade, ninth grade, 10th grade, if I had a game that was worthy to my father, my house was lit up. People were there, music was on, everybody was hanging out. if I didn't live up to his expectations, that house is dark. He's on the couch, my mom's in her bedroom, and I identified my performance with that at a young age. So not only was I fighting myself, but I was also trying my hardest to allow my house and the people that I love and love me, let them celebrate in this.
I think a lot of kids go through that in so many different ways.
Totally.
It's so interesting when we're young about how everything we like, oh, it's our fault that they're acting like this or they're not happy. Do you think if you were your father, you would have recognized that maybe your personality, like you have two sons, right? Like maybe
Mhm.
one personality is built more for competition and athletics and grinding it out, and another personality might be better put in a different way. I'm just curious as a parent, now that you've gone through all of this experience, how do you parent them differently when it comes to sports?
Oh gosh, I'm a much better parent. I'm a much better parent to my younger one than I was to the older one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the truth, that's something that both of us as a family we have to deal with that today, right? Like that's still there. Um, I watch how I react to my youngest, and my oldest sees how I react to it, and he's like, "Hey, like I didn't get that. Like that wasn't on the table when I was his age." Um,
Like, what does that look like though? Like, even in a scenario?
yeah, so gosh, I'd like to say that I wasn't that parent that felt, um, that lived through them, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm a savage. I'm an absolute savage. And I can say that I've done a lot of therapy. I've worked really hard to kind of tame that person inside of me. But when I'm like 2 years sober, 3 years sober, 5 years sober, in that environment, I only know of one way to deal with that environment, and that's to blow that environment out, right? Like I'm
Mm.
gonna blow this place up, and everybody's against me, everybody's against us, and I instilled that in my oldest, right? Like that's not fair, like that's totally not fair. So, him being 25 today, and it's interesting, right? Because in this, some people will take this the wrong way, but when my kids became adults, and I say adults like in their 20s, early 20s, sobriety wasn't enough, right? Like they celebrated my sobriety. They were on this ride with me. They love it. They loved it. But all of a sudden, I felt like there needs to be more. And it was like, wait a second. Now, as adults, we have to rewind because my kids are carrying some of these burdens,
Mm.
and I'm seeing them, and they want to let go of these burdens. And, um, at like 14 years sober, I jumped into some serious therapy. And, I've been in it every Friday from 10:30 to 12, um, just trying to be a better dad, and
Mm.
trying to let go. I saw that you did Dick Schwartz, right? Like IFS is my thing. Um, it's just handling those parts, and kind of thawing out. And we all do it as a family. So, that was a long-winded answer, but it's a process, right? It's been a process. Um, there's amends to be made. There's the tough conversations that had to happen, and I believe there'll still be more of them. So
I don't know about you, but I'm willing to apologize to my children. And then it's such an interesting also though reflection back where you think as a parent, I hoped I could avoid having to do that. And yet I don't know if any of us are willing to apologize, then we're
mm,
not, all of us are going to have to at some point.
sure.
And
You know,
it's a way, it's some of the moments that's where really growing up.
mm. Oh, totally. Listen, I think that I've grown up more in the last 2 years,
Yep.
than I did in the last 47 years. Um, but my therapist said something it's pretty simple but profound. Um, I told him, I made an amends to my son, and he said, "But did he want it? Like, did he want that from you?" And I was like, no, I wanted to get. Well, that's not fair. Let's
Mm.
just ask him. And so there's been so many things in the last 2 years that I've kind of embraced and really looked within. And unfortunately, that process causes some struggle and some pain. And, you know, again, I went on a podcast like a year ago, 2 years ago, and it was a pretty, it was Rich Roll, right?
Hmm.
Big time guy. Um, I flew cross country to be in that studio. I had just started my therapy, and that whole podcast, I'm having a panic attack. The whole podcast.
And for you, because I mean, I've had experiences of feeling anxious, but I'm not a person who does that.
Yeah,
What's happening? Is your mind racing and you've got a narrative going on? Like what's happening in that moment? Because I also watched that podcast and
yeah.
you couldn't really tell.
No, you couldn't. But I'll tell you that the secret behind that podcast is I taped it twice. So I went for like 80 minutes with him, and I couldn't pick up a glass of water. So it looks like me shaking, right? Like my legs. I've never experienced it. I was like sitting in his studio, so embarrassed. I just had hip surgery, and I'm blaming it on my hip surgery. Um, but then I started having a little more, and my glass was just too full, right? Like I poured too much into it, and I had to do what's necessary to like empty that glass a little bit. So that's what that therapy has done for me. It's emptied the glass.
How did you recover from your hip therapy? Did you do it without any painkillers?
So I mean, I wanted to fight every doctor in the hospital that day because everybody knew who I was.
Yeah.
Everybody knows my background, and I'm laying in bed and I am like hurt
What
and
kind of, did you get a replacement? What'd you get?
replacement.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm laying in bed post surgery, and the guy gives me Ultram, and it's like, in my world, Ultram's like Advil, and he was 100% right, right. But at that time, I wasn't feeling that. I was
Yep.
like, treat me like I'm any other patient. But the truth is, I'm not any other patient with my history. So I went on like a protocol for about 4 days that was dispensed to me. I had no contact with it. But I'll tell you, it's not my first surgery. I had surgery on my ankle, and I was probably 8 years sober. And it was really the hardest part about that surgery was that I felt the feeling again, right? So there go the opiates, um, and I didn't like it, and I was just so hurt. Like I look back at my life and I said, look how much I've caused for that feeling. And I was like, how did I go so far down for that feeling? So that was a struggle. It was once I kind of felt it again for the first time in 8 years, I was just underwhelmed by it. And I was hurt that I took everybody through this process with me for that.
Is there a time that, and it's interesting because you have the same partner, like you've gone through this with some of the it's not like you blew up your whole life and then started new with all new people. Like you've been
Sure.
with the people have been with you.
Yeah.
So you have this identity as a basketball player, very defined, very early. Then you have these other identities because once you get into the public eye, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, then you get a new identity. They gave you a different identity when you get in trouble. And then it's like, oh, an addict. And then it's recovered. Like it's all of these things that we
Mm-hmm.
attach or get attached to us. are you getting to the place that it can just be like you? And when I say you, just the essence of you, not you, Chris, the dad, the husband, the
Totally.
basketball player, the recovered, the public speaker, all these things. Are you getting to the place? Because I feel like that's one of the goals, right? As human beings, is when we can abandon and we're okay with like, no, it's just me.
Mm. I mean, that's the goal, right? Like the 8 C's, right? Like if I can just be within self and not struggle with those parts in me, like I've done a lot of work around that. Like, even at 15 years sober, when I saw myself in a Celtics uniform, I was so full of shame, so embarrassed. And I never wanted to see it. And if I'm being honest and upfront, like I still struggle with it a little bit. But like, that I've done a lot since then. I've created something really special for myself, for my family, for a lot of different people. And I can't live in that part, right? I can't live there. And I've done a lot of work around that. So um, I think I'm pretty close. I think I'm pretty close to being me, to being that authentic, real, and not carrying all those other burdens with me.
I often wonder though, like when I see certain personalities, like even if you were born into like quote the perfect home, whatever that means, because it's not, it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
I almost feel like certain people, no matter what, they're going to have to go through it.
Mm.
Like it's, you know what I mean? Like it's like the parent, the rough town, Fall River, like all these things certainly maybe compressed it, but you see certain people and you go, maybe they're not really built in the way for this world. Like,
Mm.
you know,
I'll say this: my mother, if my mom could do it over again, she probably would have stopped me from playing basketball. Like my mom, when she was dying, we had different conversations, right? And my mom was sadly apologetic, right? Like, I'm sorry, I should have reacted sooner, I should have did this sooner than I did. And so I think if my mom, I think she knew in her heart that I wasn't built for it, ultimately. I was built for the sprint of it, but not for the length, not for the extent, not for that long-term time.
it's so funny how we unfortunately only get the lessons after. So let's talk about addiction. And do you think people know right away if substances are an issue for them, or do you think there are certain people where it creeps up on them, like, oh, this is not, this is, now I have a problem? How does it look?
I think alcohol is probably the scariest of, when it creeps up on you. I think I see, at my center, right? I see the average age of people seeking help for alcohol is between the age of 35 and 50. And then they get sober and they're like, why did I wait so long? Alcohol drags you for a while and it doesn't kind of let go of you. The other thing is too, it's for an opiates, for the drug that I really dove into. Um, my wife gets sick from them. I get warm and fuzzy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a huge difference. Like my wife, if she's having surgery, she's like, please don't give me anything. Like, I don't want to feel that feeling. I don't want to get sick. And I'm like, bring that feeling, give me more. Um, so some people are fortunate, my life would be very different if I got sick from it. But I didn't. And I knew that I had arthroscopic knee surgery in the 8th grade. And like I came home from surgery and everyone was like, oh, how you feeling? And I dropped my crutches and I'm like, I'm good, I'm great. And it was very, very apparent that night in my living room, in hindsight, looking back, that I enjoyed I enjoyed that feeling much more than I should have.
If you were going to talk to a young adult person who sort of is scanning their life and thinking, you know what, alcohol's too much, or maybe I'm using weed to medicate or
Mm.
kind of soften things, how would you invite them to take first steps to sort of not only look at it, but then a productive way to try to tackle it?
Sure. I mean, I think it varies, right? I think it varies from person to person. I think there are people that are in much more acute situation that need to address it
Right.
pretty drastically and immediately. And then there's others that it's a process. But for me, I just like, why wait? Why wait?
Mm,
Why wait to minus that from your life? And I'm not, I'm not judging anybody. Like, my wife can have a glass of wine. She can drink a beer with her girlfriends. Like, she's okay. I'm not, right? Like, I can't do that. But there's people that wait too long. There's people that, they know that they're missing out. Um, and there's something inside of them that they need to let go of. It's just challenging people to meet them at that moment where they understand their life can be so much better without it.
when people are in that, they have a bit of, I mean, it's natural, right? They feel guilty, they're shame. I think we have these mechanisms in us to help lead us usually to a better place. And I also think those same emotions keep us from trying to get help that we need.
Hmm.
So if someone is going through, that feeling of shame and guilt, because it can also someone told me once, guilt's from the devil.
Hmm.
And when I heard that, I went, oh, that's a complete waste of time, because it's not going to keep me from making it better. And it's only something that suppresses me. And once I heard that, I was like, I'm not going to waste a lot of time there. I'm going to make it better, apologize, do whatever. How did you, because I feel like that's such a hard thing for people. No one's harder on us than ourselves.
Hmm.
How do we encourage people, one, to know that it's okay?
Hmm.
Like, we're not good or bad. We're going through something. How do we help people? And how did you finally get that kind of, I'm not going to feel shamed? And you did this on a large platform. You did this on a
Yeah.
big stage, which would kick most people's ass.
Hmm. And the truth is, I'm still doing it in this sense, right? Very publicly. My recovery has been very public. And it wasn't something that I had planned on. It just, ESPN said, we want to tell your story about addiction. And, I was 2 years sober and I had no idea what was going to happen from that. And, what's transpired after that is something it's been very public and out front. And at times extremely difficult. Listen, guilt is from the devil, but I still struggle with it, right? Like, I say all the time, I wish, like, I have forgiven much greater than I've been forgiven. Like, that's harder for me. It's hard. It's easier for me to forgive.
Sure.
It's harder for me to feel forgiven. But the truth is, and I didn't really understand this until I opened up Herren Wellness, like, how important it is to just be part of something, and to have people around you that are just like you and that feel what you feel and understand what you've gone through. So I think it's extremely important to find that community that embraces you, that little tribe that doesn't judge you and understands the guilt you feel and are in the process of trying to be forgiven and just want to go to a place where they can unload it and walk away from it.
Yeah, I always love the idea, like when people talk about baptism, and being reborn. I always feel like when people are finally at the place where they go, hey, I was doing something a certain way, I'm changing, that you wish you could just let them be reborn and say, because I feel like the shame and guilt is almost as hard to get through as why you were originally there.
Hmm. Listen, again, I'm careful now that my kids are a little older, right? Like this lands differently at sometimes. But I'm just speaking my truth to you. If people often say to me, like, what would you change? If you had a chance and you could go back to that dorm room that night at 18 years old, or the first time you did heroin, if you had that type of superpower, um, what would you do? And it's always been, I would change my kids' memories, you know? So right there proves that I'm still in the process of guilt and trying to work my way through that because, um, as a father, it's really hard to know that, that they've walked on this path with me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, although for 16 years it's been beautiful in sobriety, um, it doesn't take away, it doesn't
Yeah.
erase what we've gone through.
I'll give you a different perspective.
Please.
So my husband is a very talented athlete,
Mm,
and so for the first, we've been together almost 29 years. So for the first 12 years, he very subtly, in certain ways, drank pretty much every day. I'd say red
mm,
wine, and it had its teeth in him, and it was still in bed early, nothing overly destructive, which, like you said, it drags you for a longer time sometimes
mm,
because you can go, right? Like performing in a sport, some of the best performances right at this time. And I used to think, I'm not going to live with this forever. And this is a smart person. I feel like he's going to figure it out. And as you know, you can't tell anyone
mm.
anything. I can't be
Yeah.
like, you have to stop drinking. That doesn't work. Long story short, of course, we got to go through some shit. And then Laird decides it's not serving my life and I'm going to stop, and just boom. Right. And so that was about 17, almost 18 years ago. And I want to tell you, as somebody who's gone through it with somebody, as a
Mm,
partner, I said to Laird, I don't really care what you do in your life. Like, make a gazillion dollars, ride a 5,000 foot wave. The thing I
mm,
most admire you for is that you were in a behavior and you changed that behavior. As a partner, the thing I most admire, besides obviously I appreciate he shows up as a father and does some important things,
mm.
to watch somebody be able to take the bull by the horns is one of the most impressive things that we can witness. So just as a side note,
Appreciate
um, I don't know that it's about getting it perfect. I think it's about if you can course correct. Um, Not only is that a powerful lesson you can show your children and your wife, it is a stellar example.
that. Thank you.
I don't
You
I
can,
don't know if it lands, but
yeah,
I'm
no, it
telling
lands.
you.
I could cry. That's how much it lands. So that's something that I needed to hear. And I'm, listen, I am so, if I'm being honest, and I don't say this, I try to say this as humbly as possible. Like, I am so proud of the life that I put together in 16 years, right? Like, I'm very, very proud of that. Um, I think my kids witnessed that. They witnessed their dad like dig deep and fight his way back, and it's something that I cherish. That I don't really ask them, hey, how was it to watch, the climb? Um, but what I do think is beautiful too is, as they got older, they had their own, moments, and they knew there was a place to go for it, and they kind of followed me through the door,
Yeah.
which not in recovery, and I don't want to tell their story, but just in therapy,
Yeah.
like dad's doing it, and I don't know if there's I've given them anything better in their life than that.
I'm always curious as somebody who's gone through a lot of stuff yourself, when it
Mm,
comes to your children, because it's the one relationship we're not objective, and they
mm.
come to you and lay whatever their burden is at your feet. I've experienced it
Sure.
as a parent. How'd you develop the skills to manage that? Because I think that that actually is maybe one of the hardest.
Mm. I think that especially in the last couple of years, I think that they saw again, and it's weird that it keeps popping up like sobriety wasn't enough.
Mm.
Um, I had to do more. Like I wasn't doing enough, and I had to grow up. I had to let go. Right. I had to do things that allowed me to let go of these burdens and these exiles. Like if you want to get into the Dick Schwartz language, but like that stuff I had to just get better at. And doing that has allowed me to be a proud father. Like weird, right? Like and I say this and I say my son sent me a text on my birthday and, he's 25 years old. And I said to him, that text, nothing's made me feel more like a dad than what you just sent me. And there's a lot of growth in that, and we've walked that road together. And the fact that they saw me open that door first and say, let me take a look in there and see what's going on behind that, and it's enhanced their life, it's enhanced our life.
Yeah, and you can't, the kid with our kids, right? That we can't fool them in any way. So when they even remotely give you an even thumb or a thumbs up,
Yeah,
that's, there's nothing better than
totally,
that.
totally.
What about your wife? What traits does she have?
Mm,
I also think sometimes partners see the real partner.
mm,
They know the real person in there. They're not distracted by
mm-hmm.
some of the foibles or the environments, kind of exaggerated certain things. I think they see the spirit of somebody. That's actually what they respond to and have fallen in love with. But what do you think that how was she able to endure the
Yeah,
process? And it's easy to say, oh, you had a child and okay, you loved each other, but it's more, it's a lot more than that.
no doubt. And not speaking for her, but I think that she got sick with me, right? Like that's kind of how it happens, right? I think you know one day turns into 10 years in that world. It's just like it's just a tornado, and it's chaos, and like I'm gonna get to the end of the week, and then it's the end of the year. Um, but the beauty of it is, and there is kind of that fairy tale part of the story, that my wife, we met when we were 12. We were little kids. And I think my wife saw that person when she saw me as an adult struggling, when she's seen me in my tough moments. I think she can go back and think about, falling asleep on the telephone and making little tapes together, music tapes and cassettes. And I think she you'd have to ask her, but I think that's what she held on to for a long period of time.
Something that also is interesting is when somebody does decide to get sober, which is such a positive thing. Also, everyone in their life, they're also waiting for the shoe to drop sometimes.
Sure.
It's like
Yeah.
1 week, 1 month, 6 months.
Yeah.
That's actually not, I found once I was doing that myself, I was like, this is not helpful.
Mm.
Because it's almost an energy of like with your kids where you're waiting, you're sort of projecting to them, like, we're just waiting for you to screw up again.
Fail. Yeah. No
So,
doubt.
as somebody who has also alongside other people kind of said, okay, we're going to walk this new line, what are ways or things people can do that even energetically would vibrate in a way that
Mm.
is truly supportive, not like, okay, we'll wait and see?
Yeah. I think again, I think I got healthier than my wife, faster than my wife. Like I had the opportunity to go to treatment and live in a sober house and live in a halfway house, right? Like I had the luxury of going to AA meetings and NA meetings and work in a program and having people that didn't judge me, and I was able to kind of unload with. My wife didn't. She was raising two kids and a newborn baby. So we get healthier a little faster. And an old timer told me that in an AA meeting one day, like, hey, you're going to have to just wait. They'll catch up. And, they eventually catch up. And, she never, I shouldn't say never. I was probably like 7, 8 years sober. And she challenged me because she saw like there was a spot of blood on my shirt. And she lost it. She's like, can you just show me your arms? Can you roll up your sleeves? And in hindsight, kind of rewinding, I think that's the only time my wife has ever kind of gave out that energy.
Yeah. Do, does she have strong faith? Like, where does she get that strength from?
I
Or she
think
just
my
thinks
wife
you're
is,
really cute, Chris.
yeah, I
That's why.
could be, it could be. No. I think my wife is stubborn, right? I think she has this beautiful stubbornness to her that she dug in, and when she dug in and everybody ran away, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
again, she didn't take advice. It was from family, from friends, everybody run, and she dug in. And I think with that stubbornness, she was like, I'm gonna stick in this trench with you, and we're gonna figure it out. And gosh, you said 29 years. I've been married 26. So, and the beauty of it is, we've been kind of married twice, right? Like the first 10 years was not, that wasn't much there, you
Right.
know. So to go the last 16 years in recovery, it's pretty special.
There's a lot of athletes that come maybe not from great environments. We joke that we all work really hard if you come from a weird background to maybe make it stable, and then we're so surprised that our kids aren't as aggressive or like I want this as much as us, right? Because I always think I'm like, oh, you're not screwed up enough to really want it. But all joking aside, like there are athletes that come out of these environments and they get thrown into these intense situations, intense pressure, intense work, intense attention,
Hmm.
accolades, expectation. If you had somebody who was in pursuit in athletics, a younger person who was sort of, this was kind of coming in on them,
Mm.
but they sort of thought, no, I'm interested in doing this.
Mm.
What ideas maybe would you sort of suggest to them? Like people will talk about nutrition and movement, but
Mm.
what things would you invite them to sort of maybe think about layering into so that they can survive this process?
Therapy all day long. Therapy. We make kids lift weights. We make them run sprints. We
Yeah.
make them, go to eat a certain way. There's not enough on that side. There's just not enough support on that emotional side. And I would love to see that kid embrace that life and really walk that path alongside of the stardom that they're going through. And listen, the truth is, there's going to be people that can wash out of that and they're going to come out and they're going to look great. And then there's a whole bunch of people that don't. And for me, I see it on a much lower scale because college football teams, and I do all these presentations, and most don't make it. And I think if they look back in hindsight, what held them back, it would be something to do with their adolescent years, their childhood. I think that was a big factor in not allowing them to really go and embrace that life.
It's interesting too, because they don't teach us how to be successful. Like when you
No.
come from a knockaround background, you're not taught about success in both ways, right? Like in the way of like the attention, you're not actually special.
Mm.
But then the other side of, well, no, you are special, but just because you're you.
Good. Yeah.
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 Like it's
Which is
this,
empty. It's empty.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
it's a weird mixture. And I'm always interested in, and people don't also understand the price you pay even if you do make it. So you
Mm.
make it, you play some whatever sport at the highest level like you have.
Mm-hmm.
You're beat up physically. I have a fake knee
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you're not careful, like you've built this whole life now that also is of service to other people, which I think is very rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
But that for people, they're 35 and what every best part of their life is behind them. I think people don't understand how tricky sports is.
Mm. Listen, it is extreme, especially today, navigating that process, right? Like, and again, that's why I think it's so sad, right? That someone like me walking into a school, I'm kind of a one-off, right? It's like, oh, we got a speaker, here he comes. And what I try to do is create a little bit of a launch, like a first step in that kid. And, um, but we do so little. Like most adults will say, I'm so thankful I'm not growing up in this generation, right? But what are we doing? If we know that it's so hard to grow up in this generation, how are we arming these kids? What are we giving them to grow through this generation? This whether it's technology, bullying, self-harm, suicide, mental health, depression, all of these things that these kids have to face, never mind the abundance of substances, right? And how tricky that is to navigate. We don't do much to support that, and hopefully one day we'll do more, and hopefully those kids who step on a college campus and they're on that track of walking that line of stardom, that they can look to their left and there's another track and you got to jump on that too,
Yeah.
and let's get on that track.
Coaches and teammates for you
Mm-hmm.
towards the end of your professional career did play a more positive role for
Yeah,
you.
they did. I was fortunate. I my rookie season, I landed in a locker room with the Denver Nuggets, and there were a group of athletes on that team, and I stress it, just men, and those men took it upon themselves to help out a child, although I was 23, um, and support me and really look after me and say, these are our expectations. We're going to live that life with you. We're not going to drink. We're not going to smoke. We're not going to go out and party. We're going to make sure that you take the best crack at this. Um, I never had teammates like that. I never had people in my life that were willing to sacrifice like that. And I mean, I've never had anybody in my life that said, why don't we quit together? Why don't we just, take a break? So walking into that locker room, um, to this day, I look back on it and just so fondly, right? Like it's beautiful that these men who I never met, didn't know, but had the foresight to say, like, we understand addiction and we know you come from it, and we're not going to support that. We're going to support recovery.
What is the thing you do today? I know you're part of the program, you work the program, but in the moments, because I've heard you even say recently, like you're still not scared, but that it's not like hey, I'm chilling, I'm an easygoing person, I'm so excited to be doing this interview, Gabby. It feels contrary, actually, probably to your natural personality.
Yeah,
So
I think what I love about this is it's like it's the vibe. right? Like I feel like you understand. So for me, no, it is unnatural to be, but the truth is I feel like I'm just talking to someone without this podcast around.
Oh, so
It's
this one's okay. Okay,
yeah,
so
it's
good.
been good. It's
But
been good.
what if you're in a situation where you're like, "Oh man, this is work and this is I'm being observed, people have opinions and I'm
Mhm.
feeling uncomfortable." What practice do you have that's
Yeah.
in your pocket that you now have available to you that you've learned to help
Hmm.
you make yourself feel okay?
Well, I'll share this. The toughest years of my sobriety was 14 to 15. Um, people are looking at me like, oh, you got 14, 15 years sober. And I'm like, I'm falling to pieces right now. Um, I'm battling panic attacks. I'm in the middle of this really intense therapy. I'm managing my family, the life of traveling and being a speaker. And, I do 200 speaking events a year. So I'm constantly on the move, constantly on the road, living in hotels. Um, but I had to go back to the beginning, right? Like I had to just kind of fall back. And that was reconnecting, early recovery, meetings, going right back to where I should have been. Um, and I don't think I ever fell out of it. But when you're the one in front, there's not many out there with you, right? Like people look to you for the
Mhm.
advice or the suggestions. And thankfully I've had people in my life that kind of stand out there with me. But prayer, I love prayer. I love prayer. My mom died at a young age, and my mom didn't leave me millions of dollars, but my mom, my most vivid memory of my mom is she would bless herself when in the car if she saw an ambulance or a fire truck, and my mom made me be an altar boy when I was a child. As much as I hated it, she dragged me to church. And my mom always lit candles and told me she wanted to pray for other people. So my mom left me my greatest gift of faith and staying close to that. And so I always turn to my faith. I always turn to my people in recovery. And I'm so fortunate that I was introduced to IFS at 47 years old and EMDR. Like it changed my world.
Well, and you talked about for people listening the internal family systems, and it's this interesting thing of going back to your 12-year-old self, your 11, whatever time,
Oh,
and I've heard you even say like just hug that little boy.
totally.
It's not
Yeah.
how many points did you score, or it's and I think that is an important opportunity that we don't realize we still have, no matter how old we get, that we still always have the opportunity to kind of not retell that story, but heal and then, finally move on. Do you have a mantra like, sometimes if I feel like things are overwhelmed or I get overwhelmed or it's busy, I sometimes will just say to myself, hey, it's not about you. Like that's a
Mm.
good, like that gives me distance right away and helps me operate from a better place. Do you ever have, when you're feeling the squeeze, a phrase or something that you tell yourself that sort of brings you to a place?
Yeah. And again, I'm going back to it like the serenity prayer, right?
Mm,
Like the serenity prayer for me, it tells me, like, hey, chill out. It's not about you,
yeah.
like it's bigger than you. Let go, let it in. And but that's not always easy, right? That's not easy. I wish it worked all the time. It doesn't. I fight that. But it gives me peace. It gives me some freedom. It gives me some space.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what I need. And like I said, um, people say, what would you say to that little kid? I did a thing for Gail King show, like the note to self.
Mm-hmm.
500 words. I'm like, I'll crush that. That's easy. I'll be done by the end of the day. I've never gone back and talked to that child, right? Like that almost killed me, literally. Like I was like in pieces over this. I never sat down and tried to give my younger self advice and comfort. And I did that. And it was hard. It was really hard. And then people would say, well, what would you say to that little kid? And I wouldn't say a word. I'd just give him a big, long hug. Like that's where I think that's what was needed.
Yeah. My husband, one time I remember one of my daughters is very emotional, and
Mm.
that is not my first language. Right. So
Oh, yeah.
and one day she was there and I go, are you hungry? Like she was a little kid. She was like 5 or something. And I was like, what's going on or whatever. And he walks in, he sees her and he gets on the floor, grabs her and hugs her and just lays down.
Yeah, nice.
And I was like, oh, he's smarter than I am. And
No doubt.
by the way, I want to remind you about something. You said something about as a parent, you wish at times, like if you could ever go back, we all think about this. If I could go back, I would do this different. There is not a parent alive that doesn't have that list.
Mm.
And it doesn't, so maybe for you, you think it's so obvious because of the path you've taken. There is
Sure.
not a parent alive that wouldn't go back and undo or reduce anything. I think that is the nature of parenting.
Mm.
So please know that
Thank
it's, we all go, oh yeah, I would have done this. What about your fitness and your food? I mean, you're an athlete, and be it, a little banged around here and there. Do you use any type of training or kind of food as a practice and a way to support your sobriety and just kind of all the hustle that you're on?
So I'll tell you, and that's I think contributed to my tough years of 14 and 15 is I got away from it, right? Like around 10 years sober, I ran a couple of marathons and like I was just doing it, right? Like I was out there and I kind of pulled back from it. Like, and the truth is, if someone sees me pulling back from that life, like I'm working closer to a drink,
Oh,
like that's the truth. Like if I keep going in that direction, at some point that's going to be on the menu, right? And that's going to appear on the menu. Um, but hip replacement, like down and out, stubborn, like I'm not fixing this. I'll get through it. And then I can't tie my shoes. And I'm like, wait a second. Um, and I went into the hospital and they were like, like you're weighing in at enough. And
right.
I'm like, fuck.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I have to change. I have to change. So I have, right? I because of my hip, I love tennis. I love doubles. Like I'm a savage on a tennis court. Um, I'm not appropriate on the tennis court, but I love it. Um, and I love just, I'm a big walker right now. I need it. Like before I did this, I was downstairs in the gym working out and
Yeah.
coming up here. So that plays a big part of my mental health.
And do you ever try to substitute desserts or any naughty food for drugs or booze or any of that?
Oh gosh, I'm terrible. So listen, I can wake up for some reason, and I'm sure there's a medical explanation behind this. Um, like Oreos at like 1:30 in the morning, 2 in the morning, I don't even see them. I'm like, "Da, da, 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 da." They're gone. And it's something, there's something to the effect of sugar when you're an opiate addict,
Yeah.
right? You wake up, your sugar is low, and you go.
Hmm.
And that 16 years sober, I still have that in me, like I'm a little cupboard savage.
Yeah.
Um, but thankfully, I've stayed out of the cupboard lately. Like I've been good with it. I'm fighting it.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of it.
You can maybe now you're at a place where you can use the cupboard as a thing of like, huh, what's going on?
Totally. Yeah, yeah, of course. what part of you wants to do this to
Yeah.
me
What's
right now?
happening?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, that's the beauty of being introduced to that
Yeah.
system, is that there's always a part of me, and there's no bad parts, right? Like that man says, he's a genius, right? Like the part of me that wants to eat a bunch of Oreos at 1 o'clock in the morning just wants to give me a little peace and comfort me, but it's just not the right way to do it. So let's keep that part at bay.
Yeah. Well, Chris, in starting to wrap this up, I have to ask, as a partner, as a husband,
Mhm.
sometimes when someone is, the addict in the relationship, there's a lot of space and time and energy for them.
Mm.
And we talk about your wife kind of catching up because you got to be in a program and are in a program. Is there ways that you make space for her that maybe you've had to learn that there wasn't room for before?
Mm. I think I'm still learning that space, right? At 26 years sober, right? I mean, 26 years married. Um, you know, One thing about me is you find me at home. Like that's where you find me. You either find me at the grocery store near my home or at home, you know? So for me, I'm very well aware of that self-care on her end. Again, I think if my wife was on this with me, I think she'd say she was very envious of recovery, because like all of a sudden I had this team of people that loved what I had gone through in life and loved what I'm going through. So she's found her team, she's found her people, and I'd like to think that I find that space for her.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then as a parent, because it's something we're all navigating as parents, and I'm just curious if
Yeah,
you're winning in this way better than
yeah,
someone like me.
yeah, yeah.
Technology. How
Oh,
is there? I see. I'm glad to see that face because that's
yeah,
how I feel. Because people think, oh, I'm pretty healthy. I eat well. I move. I can talk about all that,
yeah,
whatever. And they go technology. I go huge failure. Like
yeah,
my youngest kid, I joke, is the experiment. We're like, well, maybe we've lost her to the experiment. The older
yeah.
two seem to have slipped past it. I was just wondering if you had put any systems in place. I know your youngest is about a junior in high school or something like that.
Yeah.
If you guys figured any secrets out there, because I haven't.
No, I haven't. I have not. I regrettably look at it and say, why didn't I? Why
Yeah.
didn't I implement like this phone tech lifestyle
Yeah.
when they were younger? And then I say, like, who am I now to say, hey, we're going to put the brakes on this and we're going to change it after I allowed you to do it for the last 15 years?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
no, I'm with you.
Okay, last two questions. If you're a parent of a young person that you're still in charge of, or even a
Mhm.
young adult, it's weirder and harder to help your young adult children than it is your teenagers because you have more control. What would be the most productive way if you know it's time to approach them or they've got something? What do you think is the most? And I know every person is different, but in general, what's a good starting point?
For me, what I've learned is just to ask, right? Like we're so afraid to ask them what they need. I know I was, and like that's kind of going back to the amends I made to my son. My therapist was like, maybe he didn't want it, So just ask them what they need,
Hmm.
and oftentimes they'll tell you what they're missing out, what the void is, or what they. So I just ask a lot. I ask, where do you need me? Where can I be of service? Um, and again, they're kids, right? They're like over the recovery lingo and the therapy, and all that stuff. But it's just for me, it's just asking.
Yeah.
Mm,
And I hear this because we do certain events, and the men will approach Laird because Laird has talked freely about stopping drinking, and I think a lot of people are navigating this. So if someone is listening in their lives, and I know and I understand why people are scared, because
mm,
it's going to change their lifestyle, they're going to lose friends, there's going to be all kinds of things that revolve around alcohol. But if someone goes, I know it's bigger than I am, is it go to a meeting? What's the first best step, do you think, for somebody who goes, you know what, this is going somewhere I need to redirect?
Honestly, from a medic, like you have to kind of dig a little deeper to
Mm,
see, like to tell someone to quit drinking and go to a meeting. Like I would never say that to my dad. My dad would, he'd have a seizure.
right.
You can't walk away from alcohol responsibly, medically responsibly. But yeah, I mean, listen, there's meetings are a community, right? It's like you're gonna walk in and you're gonna have a team of people that are willing to go further than most people are with you. Um, I just again, it's I ask people all the time, why wait? Why wait for it? Like take that step. Why wait? Um, but there are the other thing too is what I've learned over the years is see, I'm an AA guy, right? As you know, like 12 steps but that's not everybody's way, you know?
Hmm.
There's other ways to get sober. There's other ways to live in recovery. There's other programs that support it.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just kind of introducing certain things to people. What I'm very proud of is, at my center when I opened it, and this is my little place, right? Like I'm 10 years sober. My wife and I, we push everything in and say we're going to do this, and it was a huge risk. It's huge up, and um, I just wanted to offer what most people say they offer, whether it's yoga, breath work, massage therapy, acupuncture, smart recovery, refuge recovery. I wanted to offer as much as possible so they'll find their track, right? There's a track there and you gotta help them find it and get on it.
How long do people go to the center for?
Oh gosh, I'm so lucky. Average length of stay is about 90 days. So we get people kind of they're bought in, like they're there. If people call me and say I want to send my son or my husband and um not for 28 days, not with me, you know, like the data, the
Mm.
numbers. I mean, it is so scary how different it is from a person who commits to 3 months as opposed to a month. I mean, it is really, really scary. And so I'm extremely benefited from people who are bought in and want to stay long term.
You've won games and you have people that go to your program for 90 days. And I, I can't imagine what that feels like for you to be a part of someone's success story.
Mm. Listen, Chris Mullen, Chris and Liz Mullen, I am who I am because of them, right? Like they saved me at a time where nobody knew how to save me. They threw that lifeline to me and pulled me in and gave me an opportunity. And that's all I ever wanted to be. I wanted to be Chris Mullen. I wanted to be Liz Mullen. Um, Fortunately, we've been able to do that, as a family and opening up Herren Wellness and having that front row seat, right? But what's beautiful is it's almost full circle. I know we're almost done, but I had a guy who was at my center, and he's works at a very prestigious university in New England, and I just had a great relationship with him. I loved him, and I just met him, but there was a vibe, right? And he stayed at my center for like 90 days, and his family really changed. And the day he was leaving, I got a message from his 26-year-old daughter thanking me on Instagram. Like, I can't thank you enough, and what you've done for my family, all the stuff that means everything. But then I see there's a message above it. And I was like, wow, I read part 2 before part 1. So I scroll up, And that message was from 2014 when I spoke at her high school. I walked out of her high school 10 years ago, and she said, "Thank you for coming." And 10 years later, she's thanking me for helping her dad.
Yeah.
So right there is my life's complete.
Yeah. And I think we all somehow strive to get attention and approval and all these things. But I do think, and you're a great example, is that when we can be of service to other people, it's quiet, but it is the thing that is so fulfilling that does keep us out of the Oreo cabinets.
Totally. Yeah, less Oreos.
You
Help
know,
others, less Oreos.
it's so true.
Totally.
So, Chris, maybe just remind people if they want to learn more about the center, your documentary, books,
Yeah,
just so if people want to, go
sure.
deep.
Yeah. So the center is Herren Wellness. My foundation is Herren Project, right?
Mhm.
Over the last 12 years, we've scholarshiped thousands and thousands of people who don't have the resources to go to treatment. And then there's Herren Talks. And, we do around 250 talks a year, 200 talks a year. But I'm easy to find. I'm not hard. I'm accessible.
Is there one last thing you have in your mind, like a dream or something that you want to experience that you haven't yet?
No, but I'll say this, and this is going to sound weird, right? But I wish I could give you a hug because this was unbelievable. I'm not in studio, but I wish I could give you a hug because our souls connected today on this. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Chris Herren. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. And I really think that when we reveal ourselves the way you're willing to, and you were forced to, and we can endure it and then help other people, it's worth 50 championships. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Great to meet you.
Thanks.
All
Aloha.
right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So thanks again for joining me and listening to the Gabby Reece Show. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if anything showed up today that you find would be helpful to someone you know, pass it along and make sure to share with us what really resonated and stood out for you in this conversation. Thanks again for joining us. Keep going, and I'll see you next time.